Good evening, and a warm welcome to yet another biography event. My name is Kai Bird, and I have the honor of serving as director of the Leon Levy Center for Biography, a wholly unique institution hosted by the Graduate Center and founded by Shelby White and the Leon Levy Foundation in 2007. I want to thank Shelby for her steadfast support. Specifically, I want to thank her for her incredible contribution of $10 million to our endowment fund, plus another $5 million in matching grants. So if any of you have some spare change, the Leon Levy Foundation will match your grant up to any amount of $5 million. And if you give us $1 million, we'll name one of the fellowships after you. I do not jest. As a matter of fact, Professor Emeritus at New York University, David Levering Lewis, has done just that, donating $1 million that was then matched by Shelby White to fully endow one of our 5 biography fellowships. This just happened, just was announced today. It will be called the David Levering Lewis Fellowship, and it will be devoted to biographies that explore lives from the African diaspora. David's gift is quite extraordinary. Our next event will be on Tuesday, March 24th at 6:30 p.m., featuring CUNY professor Gail Levin's biography of the artist Alice Baber. Gail will be in conversation with Deborah Solomon, currently a Leon Levy Fellow working on a biography of Jasper Johns. If you have not done so already, please register your email address on our website so that you can be notified of our future events. But tonight I am delighted to welcome Daniel Pollack-Pelzner to talk about his new biography of Lin-Manuel Miranda. He will be in conversation with Jennifer Schuessler, a culture reporter for the New York Times. Pollack-Pelzner has written about theater and contemporary culture for The New Yorker, The Atlantic, and The New York Times. Born and raised in Oregon, he teaches theater history at Portland State University and is the scholar in residence at the Portland Shakespeare Project. Jennifer Schuessler has been with The New York Times since 2005, working first at the Book Review and then expanding her culture beat to cover intellectual life and the world of ideas. I must say that is a fabulous beat and most important in our current times. Daniel and Jennifer will be in conversation for about 40 minutes, and then they will take questions from our in-person audience. Finally, the author will be signing books afterwards in the lobby. This event is being live streamed, so hello out there to our virtual audience. We will try to end this program after about 1 hour. Again, thanks to the Leon Levy Foundation for funding this and all our other events. And thanks also to Karen Sander and the Public Programs team for their co-sponsorship of this event. I now turn the conversation over to Jennifer. Thank you.
So a little bit of autobiographical background to this conversation. I first met Daniel, or DPP, as he is in my phone, in Oregon at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, where I was there as a reporter writing about a new project, and he was there as an academic authority. So I first encountered him as a distinguished, if slightly woodsy, Pacific Northwest Shakespeare scholar, and over the years, he was writing all these wonderful articles for The New Yorker, about Shakespeare, also about contemporary theater, and I love theater, go to a lot of theater, and we would have coffee or sometimes wonderful Persian tea when Daniel was in town and talk about shows we'd seen. And when I was thinking about this conversation, I was like, I'm gonna have to remember there's other people in the room. So usually we'd sort of trail off into shop talk and then gossip, which has nothing to do with the art of biography, no gossip. So we'll try to keep things, very high-minded. Well, I guess my first question is, I remember at a certain point you told me you were writing a book about Lin-Manuel Miranda, and I'd been a little bit on the Hamilton beat myself, and it was going to be a biography. And I sort of wonder, since this is the Levy Center, which is dedicated to biography, how you think about if you're surprised to find yourself writing a biography, and also why telling a story about someone who's still in his early 40s, mid 40s, very much in the middle of things, would take the form of being a biography as opposed to some other kind of book.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jenny. And let me just say first, what a treat to be here in dialogue with you. I love it. Any chance I get to talk to Jenny is a wonderful one. I think Jenny's articles on Hamilton are probably my most cited secondary sources in the endnotes to the book, and I always learn something wonderful in conversation with you, so glad to be here with you. Thank you, Kai and Thad and Karen for hosting us, and thanks to Marcia Wagner and Jean Strauss for making this connection, and thank you to all of you who are watching remotely too. I hope to meet both of you someday. I'm just kidding. I actually know both of the people who are watching on live stream. And hi to Trisha and the Lin fam. You guys are phenomenal and I adore you. And I think we have Lin-Manuel's elementary school music teacher, Barbara Ames, who wanted to be here tonight, but mobility was tricky with the recent snow, and she said she would be watching remotely. So I'm saying, hi, Ms. Ames. This is the teacher who cast Lin-Manuel in the 6th grade play as Conrad Birdie in Bye Bye Birdie, clad him in this little gold lame jacket that his abuela sewed for him, and then told all the other kids in the show that every time Lin-Manuel started singing, they should gasp and faint on stage. And so at the end of that performance, with the stage littered with the corpses of his admiring classmates, Lin-Manuel went up to Ms. Ames and said, "This is what I want to do for the rest of my life." So thank you, Ms. Ames. So why biography? At the risk of appearing ungrateful to the Leon Levy Center for Biography, I actually didn't think of this book as a biography when I started working on it. I was a history major in college, and our department chair, I remember, said, you could do anything you want for a thesis except a biography because you haven't lived long enough to be able to understand somebody else's life. And I thought about that a lot. My only consolation here is that I'm 6 months older than Lin-Manuel, so however long he's lived, I've lived at least 6 months longer than that. But I really thought of this as like a kind of 90s YA coming-of-age novel that happened to be true. And I was delighted when a reviewer for the New York Times, I think, called this a kind of nonfiction buildings roman. And I thought, that's exactly what I was trying to do. But there is no Leon Levy Center for the nonfiction buildings roman, so I'm okay if it's categorized as a biography. And I remember the first time I sort of thought of it in that form was when I'd just begun research, and Lynn texted me a letter that Oscar Hammerstein had written to his biographer. And Lynn screenshotted it and then sent it to me with this line that said, Hammerstein sent this to his biographer, so ... And I thought, oh, okay, I guess that's the role that I'm playing. But biography felt so like womb to tomb. And this is it's womb to tick, tick, boom. It's just a mid-career author. And what I really wanted to show was how somebody came of age as an artist and learned to develop the craft to be able to create these great works. But what I liked about the life story format, and I'd been writing some New Yorker profiles of different artists, I love being able to learn how somebody else sees the world and then be able to share that vision. And I love that having a life story as the narrative spine had a kind of built-in dramatic arc to it. And of course, people's lives are not stories. Those are narratives that we impose in retrospect. But Lin-Manuel's kind of is, because he's got school, Hunter College High School and Wesleyan University, in which every school year concluded with him putting on a show. So there was this kind of built-in dramatic drive toward a set piece at the end of each year. And then he spends his 20s turning his college show In the Heights into a Broadway musical. So I knew that was going to be an arc that was going to have a big payoff on opening night on Broadway. Then he spends his 30s more or less writing Hamilton, and that's going to have a gigantic firework explosion at the end of that. And then his post-Hamilton arc is really learning how to be a maker of movie musicals. That was going to culminate the year I started writing the biography, in which he had 4 movie musicals come out in that same year. So it seemed like it had a structure to it. And as an academic who's used to, making arguments and supporting them with evidence, I was really excited about the narrative challenge of whether or not I could communicate my ideas in this piece really through storytelling and through scene and dialogue and character, and try to make it something that young students might want to read, as well as musical theater fans or folks interested in creativity. And I remember when my wife read some early chapters, and she said, "Daniel, this is much less pretentious than your usual writing." And I kind of took offense, because I thought this was just as pretentious as my usual writing, because my pretense was I was thinking about the genre of the Bildungsroman, the novel of formation. And I was really thinking about when I used to teach at my university, James Joyce's Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. And that's a book that I'm sure some of you know starts from a child's perspective, right? The narrative voice is in the voice of a toddler. It says, "Once upon a time, and a very good time it was, there was a moo cow." It's like a nursery rhyme. And it ends with Stephen Dedalus ready to forge in the smithy of his soul the uncreated conscience of his race. And I thought, I wonder if I can do that in this book, is have the narrative voice grow up alongside Lin-Manuel. So it starts with a kid who doesn't like to practice piano, and it ends with this pyrotechnic artist who's drawing on every popular art form in the Americas in order to fashion a new way of storytelling. So that was my pretension. But I would say I'm not hung up on what the genre label is. I was just at a family gathering where a cousin said, "Congrats on the book, Daniel," and somebody else said, "Oh, what book did he write?" And I heard the cousin say, "Oh, he wrote the autobiography of the guy who wrote Hamlet." And I thought, okay, close enough.
Excellent. And, as a journalist, a good advice I was given long ago was don't be afraid to ask the dumb question. So my dumb question, because especially if you've read the book, is completely obvious. Why did you want to write a book about Lin-Manuel Miranda? Why was that the subject? And then also, how did you come to be able to do it? I mean, you start, speaking of scenes, in your introduction, you have a scene where you're in the basement of the drama bookshop, which is around the corner from the New York Times, or I guess maybe at that moment was in the basement across the street from the New York Times. And you talk about meeting with him, talking to him about your proposed project, and then at the end, he's like, "Yes," but he has one condition. Talk to his mother first. And I'm like, wow. I mean, I know Daniel's a really smart, really persuasive guy, but I'm like, that was an easy sell. So one, why did you want to write this book about this man, this artist, and also how did you convince him to let you do it?
Okay, so why Lin-Manuel? So this actually started when we met a decade ago at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, because there's a wonderful theater in my home state that was commissioning a bunch of playwrights to translate Shakespeare into modern English, and then a different set of playwrights to try to write new plays about moments of change in America's history, to create a kind of a canon of American theater on the model of Shakespeare's theater. And I thought, it just made me start thinking, like, okay, who are our Shakespeares today? Like, who are the artists who are telling these grand-scale national stories in an innovative, dramatic form that help us reflect on who we are as a people? And I remember this moment exactly. In 2015, I talked to Oscar Eustis, who runs the Public Theater, and he said, well, if you're interested in who our Shakespeares are today, you should check out this guy who's just written a blank verse drama, a hip-hop musical about the American Revolution. So we came to New York. It was my grandma's 90th birthday. She lived on the Upper West Side. Every spring break, we'd come to visit her, and she'd take us to see shows. She grew up in Washington Heights over her immigrant dad's kosher deli, and she took us to see Lin-Manuel's first Broadway musical, In the Heights, when it opened. And so we're coming out to celebrate her. We have one night of babysitting, and my wife offered to take me out, and she said, Daniel, I could take you to a very fancy dinner, or I could take you to see this new show, Hamilton, that's opening on Broadway. And
how did you get tickets? Oh, it was about to
it was in
transfer to
previews,
Broadway.
yeah. So you know from our Persian teas, like I said, fancy dinner, please. But Grandma said, no, you have to go see Hamilton. This is going to be the next big thing. So it was easy on previews. You just go and you get it. And the night we went in July, like as far away from me as you are here in this row, was then Vice President Joe Biden sitting down the row from us. And it was thrilling, and it was a little irritating because he wanted to use the bathroom at intermission, which meant nobody else could use the bathroom at intermission. But, like, you know, sitting next to the elected representative of American authority, while all these presidents and vice presidents were rapping the origins of American authority on stage, I felt like this is as close as I could get, you know, to seeing Henry V next to Queen Elizabeth in 1599. I thought I missed out the first 400 years of Shakespeare reception history, but I can be here when Hamilton starts to change our country's narrative. So I had covered it in London when it, you know, sort of brought the American Revolution to the seat of the former British Empire, and I went to Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria. And whenever I interviewed Lin-Manuel, you know, at a press conference or something, I was always struck by the fact that he would always credit his teachers, like Ms. Ames, for helping him develop as an artist, and he would talk about what he wanted to do after Hamilton through the lens of what he could learn from the people that he would be collaborating from. And I thought, you know, as a teacher myself, I love this way of defining a career. And at a sort of turning point in my career, an agent asked if I wanted to expand these articles into a book, and I thought, this guy doesn't need any more praise. I've written critical stuff about him already. I don't need to do that, but I would love to write a book about his education that explored how he learned to become an artist and how he synthesized every influence from his family's Puerto Rican culture to the hip-hop his sister introduced him to the musical theater he was doing at school, to contemporary political climates his dad was navigating to create a new way of making American art. And so I sent him an email with the shameless subject line, "Who tells your story?" And he wrote back. And my pitch...
How'd you get his email?
Okay, this is how I got his email. I always wonder how you get people's emails. I had written a profile for The New Yorker about his writing partner, Chiara Alegria Hudes, amazing playwright who wrote the script for In the Heights and is a Pulitzer-winning playwright in her own right. And I'd asked her if I could talk to some of her collaborators about what it was like to work with her. And 5 minutes later, this is like 2017 maybe, 5 minutes later I get an email from Lin-Manuel saying, "Hey, you're writing about Chiara, so lucky you, what do you want to know?" And I sent him some questions, and he sent me back these fabulously, like, fizzy and affectionate answers. So I had his email address. I filed it away. He signed his email, Siempre, Lin-Manuel. And I remember showing this to my sister, and she said, "Lin-Manuel has no idea how literally you're going to take that Siempre forever," in his sign-off. So my pitch to Lin-Manuel was, one of my grad school mentors, Stephen Greenblatt, wrote this book about Shakespeare called Will in the World, How Shakespeare Became Shakespeare, about how this son of a glover from provincial Midlands of England created the most enduring works of art in English. So my pitch to Lin-Manuel was, I want to write a Will in the World for the 21st century, exploring how a modern day Shakespeare absorbed all of these influences and used them to create great works of art, and I want to spotlight your key teachers at each phase of your development. And he wrote back and said he was interested in the teaching angle. His questions for Who Tells Your Story were, why you, why now? Fair questions to ask. But he said he didn't want to go back and forth on email because he was too busy with press stuff. He wanted to meet in person when the press cycle was over. So that took a year, and a year later, there we were in the basement of the drama bookshop, and I had spent a year thinking, why me, why now? And I had all this rationale. It's like, my grandfather was an immigrant, and here's how I write about August Wilson, and blah, blah, blah. And Laura, my wife, said, no, if he's meeting with you, this is not the audition. This is the first interview. He's going to share stuff. And I was like, no, I have to try out, and then we'll see if he wants to do it. And she was absolutely right. The minute we started talking, he's telling me these phenomenal stories about the advice Stephen Sondheim gave him, and he's whipping open his laptop to show me his high school videos of the production of West Side Story he directed his senior year, and he's like getting up to dance the choreography he'd learned from Andy Blankenbuehler, and I'm like, God, how did I not bring my tape recorder to this meeting? Yeah. And then we started coming up with a list of his teachers, and that was the next blissful 3 years.
Amazing. I want to talk about the kind of nuts and bolts of research, because the thing that, if you read this book, and I hope you do read this book, it's incredibly detailed, and I'm somebody who saves everything, and my mom saved things about me, but, I'm a bit older, so I was not, constantly making movies through junior high, but the wealth of stuff, like he had done so many, both school plays and then just fooling around in the room kind of stuff. And there was just this tremendous wealth of material. So I want to ask you about that. But before that, to set it up, as you said, or as he said, so much has been written about this guy, or at least about the Hamilton aspect of this guy. What did you learn that really surprised you, or you kind of didn't see coming?
Well, I think if you sort of just tuned into Lin-Manuel, when he maybe performed the first song from Hamilton at the White House, or when he won the Tony Award for Hamilton, you might think this is, this brilliantly charismatic and creative young man who's just sort of had a masterpiece pop out of his head and had it, met with rapture from everybody from the Oval Office down to, down to the street corner. And that is kind of true. But I would say part of my interest in this story was in kind of dispelling the myth of the brilliant creative as a lone genius in a sort of Garrett, Shakespeare in Love style, just having the muse strike and then the quill comes out. There are certainly plenty of scenes like that, but Lin-Manuel was a guy who wanted to make stuff his whole life, and I think he would say, and certainly his classmates would say, he was not the best singer or musician or music theorist or writer among his brilliantly talented cohort of Hunter College high school classmates. But he had just this amazing growth mindset and learning curve where he trusted that if he started making things, even before they would be good, he would learn something through the process of making them, and he could attract collaborators who would help him supplement the skills he didn't yet have: how to write music, how to play instruments, how to sing beautifully, how to do sophisticated acting. So it surprised me to learn, I knew about In the Heights, but I didn't know that Hamilton was basically the 8th musical that Lin-Manuel had written when it opened on Broadway, if you count his work in college and high school before then. And I think many people who are Lin-Manuel fans would know the origin story, that he's on vacation from In the Heights. He picks up Ron Chernow's biography of Hamilton at a Borders bookstore, reads it on vacation in Mexico, and suddenly starts hearing hip-hop songs and seeing his dad's immigrant story reflected, and then churns these songs out. And that did indeed happen, but it wasn't an accident that he had picked up that book. His high school girlfriend had amazingly saved his 10th grade American history project, which was a script about the Burr-Hamilton duel that he wrote for Mr. Steinfink's American history class. And whenever Lin could do a creative project for his work, he would. The only time he got above a C in math, he says, is when Ms. Yallo's in trigonometry let him rewrite Billy Joel's For the Longest Time as For the Law of Signs, and then recruit a quartet from the jazz chorus to sing along with him. So Mr. Steinfink said in AP in American history, you pick anything you want that we've studied. And Lin-Manuel was obsessed with figures of promise who died before they could realize the rest of their career. I mean, his girlfriend took him to see Rent for his 17th birthday, and he learned the story of Jonathan Larson, the composer who, tragically perished the night before Rent opened, and he'd had a childhood tragedy that made him think of these things too. So Hamilton was like straight in the genre of people that he was thinking about, a brilliant person who was shot before the end of his career and whose own son was killed in a duel as well. And Lin-Manuel wrote this script about Hamilton going to face Aaron Burr, but being so haunted by the death of his own son in a duel that he provided pistols for young Philip to shoot, that he had resolved not to shoot Aaron Burr lest he take another life. And there are lines in this script that show up directly in Hamilton years later. And he told me he submitted the script and got it back from his teacher, and he'd earned the grade of a B- on the project. And his teacher, he remembers saying, this is a simplistic psychological explanation for a complex historical phenomenon. You sort of reduced it to a trauma narrative. And he said years later at the Public Theater, Oscar Eustis, his producer, kept saying to him, you have to explain why Hamilton spends this whole musical saying, I am not throwing away my shot. And then finally at the duel, when he faces Aaron Burr, he throws away his shot. And all Lin-Manuel said he could have in his head was B-, B-, B-. from the last time that he tried to explain this. And he ended up coming up with a very different solution, which was sort of giving he calls it a CAT scan of Hamilton's brain in a very Shakespeare-like soliloquy at the end of his life as the bullet is speeding toward him that expands the scope of his life to be about America, you great unfinished symphony. But I love that this wasn't just vacation reading. These were, what we were seeing were really the sort of the flowers of roots that had been planted very early in Lin-Manuel's life.
Yeah, I was fascinated by that because I have read many times, and I've probably repeated in maybe some article I wrote this story, like he was on vacation, he happened to be reading this book. He was like, oh my gosh, this guy X, this guy Y, this guy Y. I was like, oh, there's a little more complicated backstory, personal backstory there and long-standing interest. So I felt like that was, I mean, there were so many amazing things you have dug up about his his juvenilia, which was, impressive. So he, again, I'm delaying the question about sources because I love sources and archives and materials and all that, but he, in his public persona, if you've ever spoken to him, and I've spoken to him a couple times, he's so unbelievably charming and open and, draws people to him. What were there things, and you obviously had incredible access to his stuff. You talked to, I think, 150 people he put you in touch with, other people you found. Were there things that he was actually guarded about or private about? And how did you realize what, if there were in fact such things, what they were, and then how did you navigate around them?
Well, we did. I mean, I think this was a very vulnerable process. I can't speak for Lin-Manuel, but my sense was there were times when he felt uncomfortable talking about things that he hadn't talked about publicly before, and we talked a lot about how, at least I felt, it was really important that this not just be, the kind of Wikipedia highlights, but that what would actually be more inspiring, I hope, for another generation of creative artists or for people who want to learn how to make things, is not just hearing about the triumphs, but also hearing about the low points, the points where he tried a project. I mean, he had this idea for a senior thesis project in college that was going to be a time travel sci-fi romance musical that was he was really trying to work through his breakup with his high school girlfriend and wondered if it would have gone better if he had been older and wiser. And then he started thinking, okay, what if there were an older version of him on his deathbed who could time travel back to tell his high school girlfriend not to wait around for him, but then also have an affair with the girlfriend. And it was just kind of messy, and all of his friends were like, that is a weird idea. He billed it as Last Tango in Paris meets Back to the Future was the tagline for this project. And it was musically very adventurous, and it was an honest and sincere attempt, and by all accounts, it was a flop. Like, he still remembers the moment when the actor who was playing the older version of the boyfriend was supposed to sit down, take off his cap, and reveal that he was actually the younger boyfriend. And he had this white makeup in his hair, aging his look so that he would be older. And this is going to be the gasp, dramatic turning point of the show. And this guy took off his cap and sat down, and all the white aging powder went poof above his head, and the audience laughed instead of crying. And Lin said his gut was still twisted at the memory of that moment. Then he learned that his idea did not work and that it didn't connect with an audience, at least at that moment. I was like, we have to have those moments too. So it's not just you wrote In the Heights as a sophomore and then it became a Broadway show, because everybody has failures on their way to success, and those are the moments when we can learn that our heroes have that too. So I really appreciated his willingness to go into those moments. And there was one day, I remember I'd asked him about the very complicated response to bringing Hamilton to Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria, which was just a fundraising effort on his part to try to drive attention and tourism to an island recovering from economic and environmental devastation and federal government indifference, but got bound up in, of course, the history of colonial politics around the island and his previous support for a federal oversight board for Puerto Rico's economy, which he didn't anticipate would impose terribly harsh austerity measures and cuts on the island, to the point that when he announced at his father's university that he was bringing Hamilton to Puerto Rico, student protesters interrupted his announcement to say, Lin-Manuel, our island is not your theater. So these real tough moments, and I remember he said, yet again, he feels anxiety in his stomach. He said his gut was twisted to this day, remembering that. And then he said, you want to just go there, let's talk about all the worst times. And so we talked about like the reception to Hamilton after Black Lives Matter, and we talked about the colorism controversy over in the Heights, and we talked about childhood traumas. And so he was, even though it was painful, he was willing to do it. And I think he has always felt as an artist that he can tap into those painful moments in his life. And so you remember the moment in our first meeting when his request to me was that the first teacher that I interview would be his mother, Dr. Luz Towns Miranda, who's a child psychologist. And she told me Lin-Manuel was a very sensitive child by all accounts. He'd cry at Mary Poppins on TV, he'd cry at an unhoused person on the street, he would cry at the chord changes in Bridge Over Troubled Water and say, turn that song off, it's too sad. His dad is a wonderfully scrappy, tough political consultant, wanted to make his son resilient and got him a little, I was just telling Deborah and Karen this, a little rock'em sock'em puppet so that he could stick up for himself, but Lynn just hugged the puppet and said, no fighting. And his mom said she saw it as her job to let him know that everything he was feeling was okay to feel. And she would rub his back and give him breathing exercises and sing him lullabies. And she had these two mantras for him that he quoted to me in our first conversation. She would tell him, this too shall pass. It's feeling really intense now, but you'll get through it. And she would say, you want to be a writer, you want to be an artist, it's all grist for the mill. Everything that you're experiencing, all the feelings you have, hold on to those feelings because you're going to need to remember them someday when you have to inhabit that point of view of one of your characters. And Lynn said sometimes this was weaponized against him. He would say, like, you don't want to take out the trash? Hey, you want to be an artist? It's all grist for the mill. You need to know what it's like. But that it helped him feel that being vulnerable, having access to those feelings that other people might feel shameful or embarrassing, was actually a kind of superpower that would give him a conduit to the stories he wanted to tell. And he, just one example was a preschool friend of his, this little girl named Allie, whom he called his girlfriend, and they would hold hands at school, and they're 4 or 5, give each other a kiss, and one day he wakes up, and his mom is in tears, and tells him that Allie has drowned terribly. One parent thought she was with the other parent, vice versa. And Lin-Manuel says the world just turned gray for like a year. And then, he went to middle school, he sort of went through puberty, and then his first girlfriend, one of his early girlfriends in high school, was hit by a car. And he started to be terrified that somebody he loved would die, or that he would die in that Hamilton, Jonathan Larson fear. And, but his mom said, he gave him a lot of help with those feelings and a lot of support, and said it's grist for the mill. And so then when he was actually writing the musical Hamilton, and it came time to write the song where Hamilton and his wife Eliza have experienced the death of their child, the first song in Hamilton took him a year to write. That song, It's Quiet Uptown, took him a day to write. But he told me that the roots of that song, of imagining what it would feel like for parents to lose a child, were planted when he was 4 years old. So I think that his mom gave him that access to those feelings. This is my amateur psychology theory, has allowed him to feel quite comfortable sharing those feelings, not just with me as a biographer, but with all of us through his art.
It's funny, I'm thinking, as you're describing his relationship with his mother and his father, and them being, in these kind of complementary ways, very nourishing, supportive parents. One of Lin-Manuel's friends describes him to you as annoyingly well-adjusted.
Yes. Yes, that was...
not the tortured artist, yeah.
Bobby Lopez's phrase, and I mentioned that to Lynn, annoyingly well-adjusted, and he said that was Sondheim's phrase for him too. So that was, I wanted to call the book Annoyingly Well-Adjusted. Lin-Manuel wanted to call it Grist for the Mill, so we both had our modes.
And it is called Lin-Manuel Miranda, The Education of an Artist.
Well, there you go.
So tell me a little bit about the sort of art research aspect of this. Obviously you spoke to, I think, 150 people. You had all of this documentation, scripts, videotapes, I don't know what, of all of these productions he had done, the 7 musicals he wrote before Hamilton, including one, I'd heard about this previously, in high school, about the stapler.
Swing line 457?
Yeah, so tell me about the materials you were able to gather and how much of it there was, how you sorted through it, how you made sense of it.
Wow. Well, I was just at the Library of Congress earlier this week looking at the Stephen Sondheim collection there. And Mark Eaton Horowitz, the curator, has done a beautiful job. So every box is labeled and numbered, and you want to see the first drafts of, A Little Priest from Sweeney Todd, you know it's whatever it is, box 87, folder 1, and you open it up and there are all the successive drafts. That is not the way that Lin-Manuel Miranda's record exists in the world. There is no archive, there is no central box with all of his stuff, which meant then that for me, finding all of this stuff was like this delightful treasure hunt. And I feel quite grateful for it because since it wasn't, there was some stuff that was archived, like the Wesleyan University Library had the script for that sci-fi time travel musical, and the Lincoln Center Performing Arts Library had the video of the first American songbook performance of Hamilton and the off-Broadway acts. Those are easy to find. But you wanted to find the script of the show Lin was in this brick prison, the Hunter College High School student-run theater club in 1994, called Swing Line 457, about this is a script written by Rob Sosin about a murder that takes place in an Upper East Side Manhattan high-rise when somebody tosses the titular stapler off of a balcony and brains somebody down below. And Lin-Manuel played a sort of jokey, kind of Neil Simon-esque altar-cocker neighbor who would come in and crack wise as the murder investigation was ongoing. This was hard to find, and I would just call up. I asked Lin-Manuel, of course, for all the stuff first, and he gave me a Dropbox folder with everything that he had, or at least that he was willing to share. But then I remember spending so long trying to track down that script to find out how to actually quote from it. And we were up against some of the challenges of differing media. So Lin-Manuel, his life story is the history of media technology in the late 20th century. He starts listening to his parents' vinyl collection, and then when he's in school, he makes mixtapes for his friends, of recording different tracks on cassette tapes to communicate his affection for them. So a lot of my key sources for early moments in his life were the track lists on these cassette mixtapes that his friends would send me, and I would try to see if I could decipher what the narrative was. I remember his girlfriend had one that it had some Les Mis and it had some Pearl Jam or something, and then the last track was U2's "Hold Me, Thrill Me, Kiss Me, Kill Me" song. And I was like, okay, I think I know what this mixtape was trying to achieve by the end. And then there was I remember in Southern Oregon, some guy had a VHS tape for Lin-Manuel's, I guess it was his 11th grade first original musical, Nightmare in D Major, about the ghost of a fetal pig who comes back to try to kill the kid who's dissected him in AP biology class. Crowd pleaser, if there ever was one. Many of his classmates can still sing the fetal pig song. Pig, I am just very big. I am just a fetal pig. I am not very big, so why did you cut me up in bio class? Is getting a good grade worth me getting slayed? But was, of course, all about his anxiety that he would die.
Thank God for Ron Chernow.
And then there was his Twitter archive, which was really helpful. So some of you may have been online between about 2009 and 2021, when Twitter was basically Lin-Manuel's diary / soapbox / sort of workshop for his ideas. And social media, of course, not a transparent window into somebody's soul. There's a performance aspect to it. There are lots of ways in which it's not fully reliable, but it was super helpful for being able to date things and being able to see what people's sort of reactions were at the time. So I remember, having all this juvenilia, trying to see, is it going to pay off the way I think? And there's this story of Lin-Manuel's first piano recital when he's 6 or 7 years old. Doesn't like practicing piano, doesn't know what a recital is, gets there, he plays his first song, and there's applause from the audience. And everybody in his family remembers him like a morning glory turning toward the sun. And he said, I know another one. And then he played another song on the piano, and they clapped again. So he played another one, and like after the fourth song, they yanked him off the bench. And this is like his origin story of finding music as a gateway to applause and a way to connect with an audience. And so then watching the video at Lincoln Center of the first time he did a public performance of basically his first 11 songs from what was then called the Hamilton Mixtape, the American Songbook series, and it was a big hit, and this whole cast, and their big applause at the end, and Lin-Manuel looks at the audience and said, "I know another one." And then he did an encore, and I was thinking like, were other people seeing the same thing that I was seeing? So I looked up on his Twitter record, like tweets from that, whatever it was like January 11th, 2012. And that night, Lin-Manuel tweeted that his sister had come to his dressing room after the show and said to him, "Oh my God, it was just like your first piano recital where you said, 'I know another one,' and then played 3 more songs." And I checked with his sister to see if that was her recollection as well. But I love that that could be like a sort of timestamp record of the history that I was trying to trace.
I mean, it seems here that, there was so much material, it's hard to track down some things, so many people to talk to. What were the sort of tricky things to navigate here? Were there particular interviews that you either wanted, couldn't get, or people who you had to approach with particular care? I don't know, what were the hard parts of this?
Yeah, there were definitely some sensitive moments. Some people were too busy. I mean, I remember going back and forth with Andrew Garfield several times, then he went off to make another movie, so we didn't get to talk. But I would say probably the thorniest part of the book comes after Hamilton opens on Broadway and becomes a mega hit and is making a ton of money for its producers and its creators. And the actors in the show are making I believe, the sort of equity scale salary per week for a Broadway show. And the cast felt that they should receive some of the profits from the show. They felt that they'd contribute to the show's development. It was also a show being, recasting American history through the bodies and the music of Black and brown artists who had contributed many ideas that Lin-Manuel had used for the show. And they wrote a letter to the producer asking if they could get what ended up. The request was 1% of the profits to share with the 30 original cast members. And of course, the producer argument usually is that most Broadway shows lose their investment, and the very few that do make money are used to fund the other ones, and the cast had agreed to a contract going in. But it became really tense, and there was a protracted, almost year-long sort of negotiating process that really spilled over to the mood in the theater and how people felt about participating in marketing the show and doing the ham-for-ham performances afterwards. So I was like, this seems important. Nobody would talk to me about it because it was a confidential.
Nobody. I mean, you have a little bit of commentary from Lin-Manuel himself.
Well,
would Jeffrey Seller talk about it?
I mean, Jeffrey would just say, boy, it was wrenching, and I'm really glad we settled it. And the first person I told was Lin, and he cried and wished he could have spared him. And Leslie Odom Jr. had some insights about it. But I found somewhere somebody had leaked the letter that the cast wrote. And then once I had that letter and what those arguments were and who had signed it, I took that back to Lin-Manuel and asked what it was like from his perspective. And I'm not an economics reporter. I do have my own sympathies in this case, but my goal was not to make an economic argument. It was, this is the book about an education of an artist. And Lin-Manuel had learned how to lead a company from high school through enthusiasm and being the charismatic fun guy that you describe, and just always making being in his show the most exciting and most enjoyable thing for anybody to do. And his In the Heights cast called it party con pay. They were having a carnival and they were getting reimbursed for it. And then here was a time when that wasn't carrying over, at least for some members of the cast. So I thought, this is an interesting stage of an artist's development. What do you do when you've learned to lead one way and then you run up against a kind of structural inequality in the compensation system of your industry, and you have to figure out some other way to lead? So that was tough to figure out how to tell that story accurately. And I felt some solace that when I wrote it up, all of the corporate and business people who read the chapter said, who are these entitled actors who are asking for extra beyond what they had agreed to? And all the artists I read said, who are these greedy producers who aren't sharing the $100 million they're getting? So I hope I tried to do justice to both sides.
And at what point did Lin-Manuel himself read the finished manuscript or read something, whether it was the finished manuscript or something else? And what agreement did you have about that in advance? And then what was his reaction?
We agreed that he would read for factual accuracy. So I could make my own interpretations, but he would tell me if I had gotten like some factual thing wrong. And of course, what's fact, what's opinion is sometimes a blurry line. So I sent him chapters as I was drafting them. Actually, the first version I wrote of the book with all these interviews, I wrote it as an oral history of just like splicing quotes together from my sources because I wanted to see if I had enough material to sustain the narrative. And that was fun, so I sent him an oral history of the first movie he made with his friends when they were sophomores in high school, Clayton's Friends. It was an oral history of Clayton's friends. And it could never be in the book because it was like 20 pages on this one moment in his life. But I wanted to show him that I was using the trust that he had extended to me and all of the connections he'd opened to me in good faith. And he very sweetly wrote back the next morning. He'd read it 3 times and was in tears every time and was appreciative. And I think that helped sort of build the relationship. So then I'd send him drafts of each chapter as I wrote it, and he would write back and say like, no, his first kiss was Claire Newman, not Amanda Morales, easy. Or he wrote satisfied Angelica's show-stopping number in Hamilton before he wrote the Schuyler sisters that introduced Angelica as a character, so I would change that chronology. But the most interesting note he had for me, I thought, early on was, so everybody calls him Lin, except for his parents, who call him Lin-Manuel. Lin-Manuel was this name his dad had encountered in a Puerto Rican revolutionary poem from the 60s by Jose Torres Santiago, who writes about a Puerto Rican soldier coming home from Vietnam, a lullaby to his son who has a Vietnamese first name, Lin, and a Hispanic surname, Manuel, in which he hopes his son will grow up in a world where his life is not fodder for American imperialism overseas. And Luis said, if I ever have a son, I'm going to name him Lin-Manuel. And he did. And then Lin-Manuel went to a majority non-Latino school where nobody could pronounce his name. And so he became Lin at school, Lin-Manuel at home. So like all of his friends, in all the quotes in the book, I referred to him as Lin. And Lin-Manuel read that first chapter and he said, would you be willing to try a draft where the narrator addressed him as Lin-Manuel, even though all the quotes were going to call him Lin? Because he felt that tension between the name his parents gave him and the history of Puerto Rican politics and art that went along with that name, and this majority white world that he was learning to navigate, was the central tension in his artistic development. And he said he thought it would be interesting if that narrative tension were built into the voice of the story. And I thought that was a great idea. So I adopted that technique from Lin.
We are open for questions, so if people can line up next to these microphones, sorry. Otherwise, we'll just keep talking. But I encourage people to ask questions. I guess maybe a little bit of a bigger picture question. There's a little bit of distance of time and certainly a kind of distance of politics in the world turning between the moment of his, he'd already won a Tony Award for Best Musical, but his just lightning in a bottle, even though it wasn't lightning in a bottle, it was many, many years and many, many inputs in the making of Hamilton, which just became such a sensation. You write a little bit, you allude to the kind of post-Black Lives Matter, kind of rethinking / backlash, if that's what you want to call it. So I don't know, from a distance of where we are now, whether it's in terms of our broader culture, popular culture, or history of musical theater, what was the Hamilton moment? What is the significance of the show, and also just of all the attention around the show and his just emergence as this sort of, magical person of American culture in this moment. I don't know.
Yeah, it is.
Put on your historian hat here.
Right. Looking back, lo these 10 years on this phenomenon. Right, because the book came out in the fall, which was the 10th anniversary of Hamilton, so there were a lot of these kind of retrospectives. And I'd be curious what you guys think about this too. I mean, I can definitely, I understand the argument of people who feel that this is a kind of relic of an optimistic earlier Obama-era moment when the show could envision a kind of pluralist coalition that would be always striving towards unattainable but still alluring American ideals of inclusion and progress. That's not how I read the show itself. I mean, and I think part of its force comes from the fact that it's not just a celebratory kind of hymn to the American promise, I mean, I certainly experienced it, and Lin-Manuel told me he was writing a Shakespearean tragedy about the ways that, in part, individual hubris and ambition can ruin the prospect of democratic institutions. And I felt like we got to live in sort of Act One of Hamilton for a while, which is about building the coalition that's going to create the promise of a new nation. And then we have experienced living in Act Two of Hamilton, which is about moments when partisan rancor become so vituperative and violent that they lead to assassination and the threat of crumbling those institutions themselves. So I do feel like it's a show that's supple and rich enough that we can see it through different lenses and different lights. And what really is enduring about the show is what Lin-Manuel has been working toward his whole life, which is how to bring everything that he loves into a form in which he can tell America's story. And that's hip-hop and Gilbert and Sullivan and the Notorious B.I.G. and Rodgers and Hammerstein and Shakespeare and the sixth grade play and his father's immigrant story and his own adolescent traumas all into one work with all of the craft that he learned how to develop over 30 years and all of the input from the collaborators that he was able to attract. And I feel like it's that sort of, that dynamism that and then the cast that allowed so many different people to see themselves and hear themselves in America's story and has just then kind of expanded what the palette is through which that story can be told.
What do you, maybe this is a little bit adjacent, when you were writing the book, thinking about the book, writing it, and then now that it's out there in the world and people are reading it and you're hearing from them in one way or another, how did you think about who the audience for this book was, despite the fact that it would be extremely vast, but there's hardened musical theater heads. There's people who just love Hamilton. There's young people, teenagers. Do teenagers still love Hamilton? I don't know. There's all sorts of people. So I don't know. Who did you think about who this book was for? Which is maybe another way of, in a more grandiose way, about like who the American public is. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Right, it is
pressure.
For all of America. Yeah, well, I was very fortunate to have, something I learned from Lin-Manuel is you don't start with the finished product, you start with a draft and then you share it with people who are smarter than you and can help you diminish the gap between what you want to put into the world and what you receive back from it. So I thought, okay, I should use the Lin-Manuel revision process for this book. So I had a lot of wonderful early readers for each chapter. And I had musical theater scholars who really wanted to know the details of like how was Sondheim influential on Lin-Manuel. And I had my dear Aunt Jude reading it, who mostly reads romance novels and wanted to know when the love story was going to kick in. And I had my mother-in-law who was really interested in the political narrative and how Lin-Manuel connected with different administrations. And so it was, and I had my parents were very sweet and read it. And I remember there was a chapter that they said they thought was really boring. And I said, okay, why did you think it was really boring? And they said, it's all about 90s hip hop. But then you mentioned Ira Gershwin, and we really liked that part. So this was useful input to be able to say, like, okay, I want to have sort of on-ramps for people who have different types of interests to be able to connect. So there are moments that are love story, and there are moments that are political, and there are moments that are craft, and there are moments that are different musical styles. And I definitely got it wrong at some points in the genesis. I mean, I always remember the day I was so excited to just, learn all this stuff, and I thought, okay, if I'm excited in it, I'll put it in. And my kids had come home from school. I made dinner, and I told them, guys, you won't believe it. Today I interviewed Lin-Manuel's freshman year roommate at Wesleyan, Josh, who was also into hip hop and also into making movies. And so Josh and Lin-Manuel got a poster of Mary-Kate and Ashley Olsen, the twins from the TV show Full House, and they put it up on their dorm room wall, and they wrote Lin over one of the twins and Josh over the other one of the twins. And then at the end of the year, when Lin moved into a Latino cultural house, they ceremonially tore the poster in half, and each took half with them. And my 13-year-old daughter turned to me and said, "Oh, Dad, you should put that in a folder called Nobody Cares." So there's definitely an outtake file for this. But I've been thrilled. I mean, I love that fans of Lin-Manuel's work and people who've been chronicling it have found things in it that they didn't know already. But I've been especially moved to hear from people who want to make art themselves that this has that reading about Lin's process and about his failures and revisions along the way have just inspired them to want to make art, which I'm delighted to hear. And I was particularly tickled that my brother-in-law, Kushal, who is a computer programmer, a software engineer, said he gave a chapter of this book to his engineering team because he thought it had an insight about creativity, which is that Lin-Manuel does freestyle improv rap. In an improv rap comedy group, Freestyle Love Supreme, at the same time that he writes musicals, a long sort of gestation process, and he calls them opposing muscle groups, the improv and the composition that can strengthen each other. And my brother-in-law said, this is how we learn to write computer programming code as well, spontaneous exercises and then big things too. So I'm hoping that other people will find that learning about the creative process and learning that it doesn't have to just be masterpieces springing out of your head can have resonance in other fields, and that it's like the book you get your niece who's graduating from college and wants to have a life in the arts and doesn't know how to pursue it, and this could be not a blueprint, but a kind of mindset to follow.
If no one else is going to ask a question, I thought I would. I'm curious to know more about the relationship between Lin-Manuel and Ron Chernow, the biographer. How did the biographer respond, and was he surprised by what happened? What is their relationship today?
Yes, Ron was wonderful to interview and very generous in this book. And he described to me, he'd had a friend whose daughter, Una, went to high school and college with Lin-Manuel. And Una showed me this email she wrote to her dad saying, I love this. She said, Daddy, this is like in 2008 or so. Like, Daddy, 2 questions. Number 1, can we come over and watch America's Next Top Model at your apartment tomorrow night? And number 2, my friend wants to adapt Ron's book into a hip-hop musical, so can you connect us to him? And her dad wrote back and was like, sure, you can watch America's Next Top Model, and the hip-hop musical sounds like a joke, but okay, I'll introduce you to Ron. So Ron went to see In the Heights, and he met Lin-Manuel backstage, and Ron's memory is Lin-Manuel came up to him and said, I read your book, I loved it, I started hearing hip-hop songs rising off the page. And Chernow said, you did? And Lin-Manuel said, yeah, and it's an immigrant story. You wrote an immigrant story. And Ron said, I did? And Lin-Manuel said, yeah, and I want to adapt it into a musical using hip-hop. And Ron said, you do? And he remembered saying to Lin at some point, like, that he thought of hip-hop as like kind of violent and misogynistic and homophobic, and like, how could that be the form through which you could tell the complex and resonant story of this American founder? And he said Lin-Manuel gave him a little tutorial about hip-hop and how it worked and the diversity of artists who use the form and the way that wordplay and assonance and end rhyme and internal rhyme function. And Ron said to me, like, in Lin-Manuel's hands, it sounded like Cole Porter. And so he thought, okay, if this is not just going to be a joke, he was up for it. And Lin-Manuel would come over to Ron's apartment and sing him what he'd come up with. And the opening song for Hamilton, Lin-Manuel told me his goal was to get the first 2 chapters of Ron Chernow's book, from Hamilton's birth in the Caribbean to the moment that he's on the boat coming to New York City, into that song. And Ron remembers Lin coming in and singing the opening number for him, and Ron was just blown away and said, oh my God, you condensed 40 pages into 3 minutes. And Ron was an English major, and he loved that the language Lin-Manuel had come up with was this kind of amazing blend of 18th century argot and 21st century slang. So you'd have, the $10 founding father without a father, impoverished in squalor. It sounded like it could be sort of, Tristram Shandy or Henry Fielding alongside Big Pun and the Notorious B.I.G. And he just said, at every phase, he said he was just thrilled by this collaboration. He was very surprised when he walked into the first rehearsal room and saw mostly Black and Latino artists portraying the founding fathers, but then he heard Chris Jackson and these other artists sing, and he said, oh, he understood what their connection was to the material. And my favorite thing that I cut out from the book was that he said at one point, Lin-Manuel asked him if Hamilton smoked a pipe, and Chernow said, I don't think so, but why do you ask? And Lin-Manuel said he wanted to have something to do with his hands on stage. So he wanted to know if holding a pipe could be that example. So they would go back and forth on this consulting process. And sometimes Ron would tell Lin, no, that's not what happened historically. There's the great line in Aaron Burr, Sir, the first...
Burr, Sir?
Yes, right? Where Lin-Manuel tells Aaron Burr he wanted to get into Princeton and graduate in 2 years like Aaron Burr did, but they wouldn't let him. He may have punched this official, the bursar. And he may have punched him, and Aaron Burr says, you punched the bursar? And Ron Chernow was like, Hamilton would never punch the bursar, the financial officer for Princeton. He wanted to get in. And Lin was like, it's a pun, Ron. He punched the bursar. And then when he saw it in performance, he got it and was like, okay, you can take that license.
Another question?
Yeah, I have a question. Okay, thank you. Hello. My name is Anthony. I'm a student at CUNY Hunter College, going for a double major in both English and theater. And so this is a really good opportunity that I got to be here and listen to this story. But my question to you is, what would you say is like your favorite part about writing an autobiography like this?
Thank you, Anthony. Well, and I'm excited for you. Pursuing English in theater is wonderful, and I hope that this is a story that will give you fuel through that process. I loved getting to talk to all of these wonderful people, and it allowed me to have a sort of vicarious sense that I was living through these different moments, and I got really excited through the narrative of it's taking Lin so long to get his first show open on Broadway. I really want to get that show open too. And then I felt like we finally opened it at the end of this, whatever it was, chapter 10, and I could imagine myself into these rooms. There's this one scene where Stephen Sondheim, Lin-Manuel's musical theater mentor, visited Lin-Manuel's high school to talk to his drama club that was putting on West Side Story. And I think I visited the room at Hunter. I talked to the teacher whose room it was. I think I interviewed 10 different people who were in that room. I knew what color sweater Sondheim was wearing. I knew what desk he was sitting in. I knew which newspaper he was holding in his hand. I knew what Lin asked for the first question. I knew what Sondheim's response was. So it felt to me like writing was a kind of time travel or teleportation that I could get to live vicariously in a world that I admired. And it really helped me as a writer as well, and I hope it could be helpful for a creative person like you. I have to admit, Jenny and I were talking beforehand about kind of the pressure of writing for deadline and wondering if you're going to get it right. And I had crippling anxiety about writing for much of my life. I always felt like whatever I wrote was not going to be as good as what I had in my head. And I had this terrible narrative for myself that if I just didn't write anything, then I wouldn't write something bad, and so I could hold on to my image of what I thought the good writing would be, which is a recipe for disaster. And learning about Lin-Manuel's process taught me that you didn't have to get it right the first time. His high school girlfriend had saved the very first draft of In the Heights that he wrote when he was a sophomore in college, and I read it, and it's wonderful. And there's not a single line or song or scene from that draft that made it into the final version that was performed on Broadway 8 years later. He completely rewrote every moment, piece by piece, in collaboration with wonderful artists and producers who helped him figure out how to bridge what was inside his head with what an audience would receive. So that helped free me from the sense that I had to get it perfect the first time. I could just write my nobody cares draft and then share it with people who would give me feedback. And it turned writing for me from a kind of onerous source of dread to a total source of joy of like, I'm going to get to live in this scene today. And so I feel like that was a gift that the biography gave me.
I think we're basically at time, but I have one question, and this is maybe me being very pretentious, that maybe you could answer briefly. Did this, I mean, you know, we talked about you being a Shakespeare scholar early on. In this conversation, you mentioned Stephen Greenblatt's Will in the World. I think you mentioned Shakespeare like once in the book, early on. Did doing this whole process change in any way you thought about Shakespeare or what it would have been like to be Shakespeare? Obviously, his life, not very well documented beyond his finished works, but I don't know, because was this, I don't know, to give you any, make you think differently about that, you know, lofty transcendent genius who we actually know was a rough and tumble man of the theater? I don't know. Did it change your
Such an interesting question, Jenny. It did, I would say, because, I mean, yeah, just thinking about what it is to write as an actor. So we know that Shakespeare was an actor in his company, and he was a member of this company, and he was writing for artists whom he knew, and sometimes, in fact, the speech prefixes in his plays have the name of the actor instead of the name of the character, because he knew who was going to be playing them. And Lin-Manuel is somebody who loves, his director says he loves making suits for people. He loves like tailoring a part to a particular artist. When he knew he had Daveed Diggs to play Lafayette and Jefferson in Hamilton, who was this phenomenal speed MC out of Oakland, he just started adding extra bars to Lafayette's raps because he knew that Diggs could deliver them. Or when he knew he had his wonderful friend Chris Jackson, who learned to sing in the church playing George Washington, he wrote a full-on gospel finale for Washington's farewell address, One Last Time. And so that helped me see Shakespeare as somebody who's not just writing for me and posterity, but is part of a community of artists and who knows his audience and his collaborators and is writing within constraints, but finding creativity within those constraints too. And that was the way I wanted to think about Lin-Manuel, and that even like the cover of this book, I told my publisher I didn't just want a portrait of him. If you look at it closely outside, you'll see that although it is Lin-Manuel, his torso is made up of all of these people who've gone into his art, his parents and his wife and Sondheim and Biggie and Juan Luis Guerra. And my idea was like there is one hand is holding the quill, but all of these people are flowing through it and flowing out of it. And that's sort of now how I think about an artist like Shakespeare too.
Amazing. Well, that is maybe a good note to end on. And I want to thank you all for coming, and I want to thank Shelby White and the Levy Foundation, Leon Levy Foundation, for sponsoring this wonderful series.
Thank you, Jenny, for these terrific questions, and thank you all for being here.